So let me begin introducing our guest. The first guest is Angela Jackson. Angela writes across a broad range of subject matter, from daredevil boys jumping from roof to impress the girls, to her mother hypnotized by Nat King Cole on late TV. From love poems to warnings to a cousin who eats too much. She can put that always personal voice of hers into the mouth of a young girl victimized in a Greek myth and end up telling this young girl's side of the story. Ms. Jackson was born in Mississippi and raised on the South Side. She is a graduate of Northwestern and holds her MA from the University of Chicago. She was a member of the organization of the Black American Organization for Black American Culture, OBASI. She was a member for 20 years. Angela is the author of 6 books of poetry, including The Man with the White Liver, Dark Legs and Silk Kisses, and All These Roads Be Luminous, which was nominated for the National Book Award. She has also written 2 plays and published a novel and has a second novel on the way. Angela Jackson has won many awards, including the Academy of American Poets Award from Northwestern University, a National Endowment for the Arts for Creative Writing Fellowship in Fiction, the American Book Award, a Pushcart Prize for Poetry, 6 Illinois Arts Council Literary Awards, 5 for fiction, 1 for poetry, the Carl Sandburg Award, and in 2002, the Shelley Memorial Award of the Poetry Society of America. Please, Miss Angela Jackson.
I'm not going to read all that I've written because it's too long, and also because I had a bad reaction to shrimp or a nut on Saturday, and I've been sick ever since. So if my throat starts bothering me, I'll just have to stop. Okay? Angels and Tricksters, looking back at the Black Arts Movement and measuring its impact now. I arrived at Northwestern University's ivy-covered Willard Hall in June 1968. It was 3 months after Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered in Memphis, and the same month that Robert Kennedy was murdered in Los Angeles. Northwestern was whiter than Christmas on a snowy day. I was excited by the privilege of being there. I was overwhelmed by not only the beauty of the campus, but the presence of so many white people. I had gone to an all-black elementary and high school. Our teachers were mostly white, but the student bodies black. Northwestern was a shock to my system. NewCap, the program of black and white students the university instituted to acclimate us to the white world and the university's mission, only served to make me consciously black. By mid-July, I had washed my hair, and my cousin Willie Mae cut it into a stylish afro. I had every intention of becoming a doctor. I do not know if I had started writing in my blue-gray notebook of poems then as a carryover of the poems I had written in high school or not. I just know that by the spring of freshman year, I had announced myself as a poet by reading a poem in public at an FMO for members only, the Black Student Organization event. That poem appeared in the NU yearbook in 1969. It had been submitted by one of FMO's Central Committee members. In 1997, at Guild Complex in Chicago, I talked about generations. I was reading with Mary Evans, a poet senior to me, who had been one of my professors at NU. That night I talked about a new idea that had come to me in a flash, an idea that is old news now, but no less true. Mine is the last generation to experience firsthand de jure segregation. When I was 11, on a visit to my birthplace in Greenville, Mississippi, we rode the city of New Orleans home. We, my Aunt Tudu, my little cousins Yvonne and Jojo and I changed cars in Memphis, for we had crossed the Mason-Dixon line. We got out of the car we had been on and moved to a car of all black passengers. If I had gone downtown in Greenville that summer instead of staying in the black community or visiting my relatives in the country, if I had wanted a sip of water, I would not have been able to drink at one marked white, even if I were standing next to it and dying of thirst. And I had been told that Greenville was a liberal southern city. On television that summer, Governor Ross Barnett proclaimed, "Segregation now, segregation forever." And that is the world he intended endured. But that is before a magnificent Fannie Lou Hamer of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party told the world, "I am sick and tired of being sick and tired." The Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act in 1965, and I was in the last generation to live under American apartheid, de jure segregation. The segregation that would follow would be as it had been up north all along, de facto. I was one of the first large groups of African American students to enter predominantly white universities. It is not that there were that many of us entering these zones of historical whiteness and access. It was simply more than the one or two who had entered at a time in days before we kicked the door into integration. The mood was high in young black America. Like Lorraine Hansberry, we called ourselves young, gifted, and black. In late September or early October 1969, I, at the urging of my roommate, Roella Christine Henderson, presented myself and my poetry to Negro Digest Black Scholar editor Hoyt W. Fuller, visiting professor at NU. I remember walking him from his class in either University Hall or Kresge Centennial. He strode along with his umbrella in hand. He said that he was inundated with work. I thought he had a wonderful vocabulary. In the classroom after class, which I attended faithfully more than I went to my own classes, even though I was not enrolled in it, he had invited me to OBASI, the Organization of Black American Culture Writers Workshop, where I might be judged by my peers. I remember thinking, Don Lee and them are not my peers. They're 10 years older than me. I will talk about my initial encounter with the fire starter poets, Donnell Lee, later Haki Mathabuti, and Carolyn Rodgers later on. I did go to OBASI the third Wednesday of October, 1969. I found it the most important appointment I have ever kept with myself. OBASI was, in short, an organization of literary revolutionaries whose goal was the creation of a literature true to the African American experience without the constraints of white critics and audiences breathing down black necks, asking us to reinvent our reality to suit them. Quote, "The writers of the Black consciousness movement are rejecting even those black writers and critics who seek to impose upon black literature universal standards of judgment, for universal in the American critical context is synonymous with white." Hoyt Fuller, Negro Digest. For too long, black writers have been reinventing themselves to gain acceptance from whites. From the beginning, black writers were discouraged from dealing honestly with their own experiences in the language and style which was natural to them. Even in the slave narratives, which the missionaries and abolitionists encouraged as fuel for their campaigns, the writers were cautioned to tell their stories objectively and without anger or excitement. Hoyt Fuller. We were in search of a black aesthetic, a black style or styles as individual and innovative as black music. We were to make ourselves aware of Western traditions, but be able to articulate the differences and similarities. For us to be universal, if that had been our aim, was to do what University of Chicago professor and OBASI associate Dr. George Kent said Gwendolyn Brooks did. She went down deep into the Black particular to arrive at the universal. The Committee for the Arts, out of which Obasi would develop, was founded in 1966 to find a solution to Black powerlessness. It was the committee's belief that the arts psychically empower people, so they conceived of an arts organization with a socio-political end in mind, to so transform and charge Black people that we would seize our destinies. Obasi was born out of the idea that we were and are engaged in a Black-white war of images. Obasi's founders believed that Black people must, quote, control their own images. Hoyt Fuller explained the urgency of this need. Quote, Black Americans grow up in a world where white people have projected white images everywhere, leaving Black people with what Mrs. Gerald calls a zero image of themselves. The Black child growing into adulthood through a series of weekend movies, seeing white protagonists constantly before him projecting the whole gamut of human experience, is, in extreme cases, persuaded that he too must be white, or, what is more likely, he experiences manhood by proxy and in someone else's image. He sees, in other words, a zero image of himself. If there are Black people on the screen, they are subservient to, uncomfortably different from, or busy emulating the larger, all-inclusive white culture. In that case, our young person sees a negative image of himself. Hoyt Fuller, The New Black Literature. In the beginning, Obasi's members were Hoyt Fuller, Gerald McWhorter, a.k.a. Abdul Al-Kalaman, and Conrad Kent Rivers. Later founders were Jeff Donaldson, attorney Edu McNeil, Joseph R. Simpson, Donald H. Smith, George R. Ricks, Bennett Johnson, and Ronald C. Dunham. Poet, activist, and educator Marion Tumbleweed Beach would say that Obasi was born in Ann Smith's kitchen. Originally, Obasi was composed of several workshops: community arts, art, and literature. For a while, Ann Smith led a drama workshop. No music workshop was established because the AACM, Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, came into being at the same time. The Afro Arts Theatre, which would be the site of Black arts movement performances, opened its door near the time of Obasi's inception. The Obasi Writers' Workshop would begin meeting at the Southside Community Arts Center in spring 1967. Its founding members included Donnell Lee, Hakiar Mathubuti, Carolyn Rodgers, Jahari Amini, Rhonda Davis, Cecil Brown, Ronald Fair, Walter Bradford, and Ranson Boykin. Its membership soon grew to include Sterling Plumpp, Sam Greenlee, Evan Higgs, and others. The Writers' Workshop was free and open to the entire Black community, and the entire Black community came. At least 20 people were at each meeting. Visitors included students from area campuses, including Northwestern and the University of Chicago, high school students, bus driver, workers, unemployed. When Obasi moved in 1967 to a storefront at 77 East 35th Street, it was even more accessible to the community. Once a woman wandered into Obasi seeking assistance. She thought we were a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I still remember how kindly she was treated and welcome to stay and sit with us in that storefront filled with comfortable old sofas and folding chairs and posters of Black events and people on the walls. Obasi's welcoming meetings were heated with debates, fast-paced and well-run. Each month, a different workshop member would serve as chair of those Wednesday meetings from 7 to 9 or 9:30 p.m. The order of events ran as follows. Visitors who wished to present work, would read first. Their reading would be followed by questions, comments, criticism from those gathered. The reader would be commended, then another reader would present his or her work. Often comments or criticisms would lead to debates on a pertinent issue. I have been told that in its earliest days, 1967 and 68, Obasi members would attempt to ascertain if a piece was black. By the time of my arrival, such assessments were a bit more subtle. We questioned whether or not a work sounded real or true or authentically black. We differentiated between work that was Eurocentric and innovative as an Afrocentric, a term we did not then use. Because Obasi's membership and visitors were so broad-based, the work that came out of the workshop was broad-based and diverse, embracing the richness of the Black experience. Rumblings of the Black arts movement would be heard as early as 1961, years before Obasi, years before a fiery young student named Stokely Carmichael would pronounce Black power under a fierce southern sun, years before anyone would say, hell no, we won't go to the war in Southeast Asia. These rumblings were in the self-described capital of the world, New York, New York. According to Lorenzo Thomas in Extraordinary Measures, the sharp ambience of New York in the early 1960s was the thump on the rump that forced the new Black poetry into breath. The New York experience possessed an energy and direction that remains remarkable today. A great source of this energy was the Harlem Writers Guild, directed by John Oliver Killens. Another was the Umbra magazine and the Umbra Workshop, founded in 1961 by a younger group of writers. The young Black writers in those years approached their world with a sense of outrage and missionary zeal borrowed from the Southern civil rights struggle and heightened by an urgency bred by their surroundings. Most of the names that Lorenzo Thomas mentions in this pre-Black arts movement New York scene are, again, male. Amiri Baraka, David Henderson, Ishmael Reed, Tom Dent, and others. It would seem that the Black arts movement's roots were male. This may be true, but its flourishings were often female, as in the cases of the highly visible Nikki Giovanni and Sonia Sanchez. Black women would begin to express themselves en masse in Toni Cade Bambara's anthology, The Black Woman, in 1969. From there, the Black consciousness, Black arts movement, and the women's movement would begin to negotiate intersection. Before this, there were the singular female voices. J.E. Franklin's Black Girl burst through the television screen in the early 1970s, but it was Ntozake Shange, as a poet and theater, author of For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough in 1976, who would announce that something new was on the horizon. Black women fiction writers, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Toni Cade Bambara, and others would, in certain cases, extend the Black arts movement, always broaden it and challenge it, as June Jordan and Audre Lorde had done, but that would come, for the most part, later when they would receive greater recognition. In its fullness, the Black arts movement was diverse, one tree of fresh, unfettered expression with many branches. In New York City, the John Oliver Killens Writers' Workshop still met monthly. One young poet who attended that workshop became the groundbreaking and best-selling novelist Terry Mcmillan. In the 1990s, she would change the face of African American literary expression and cause large commercial publishers to court African American writers. In California, Ishmael Reed's Church of Neo-Hoodoo performed its rites with a multicultural bent. In Newark, New Jersey, Baracus, the father of the Black arts movement Spirit House, moved into the political arena, influencing mayoral politics. Black Art South with Tom Dent and Ahidiana with Kalamu Yasalam flourished in Louisiana. In East St. Louis, the Eugene Redmond Writers' Workshop came into being. In Chicago, there was Obasi and Ipe, Kuumba Theater, and ETA Theater. ETA is now the only Black-built and owned theater of its kind in the country. There was, of course, the AACM. I have only touched upon the activities of the Black Arts Movement. It developed in dance, drama, music, visual arts, as well as literature. At its height, it was the umbrella name for a far-reaching alliance of the arts and activism. Leroy Jones, later Amiri Baraka, represents the most revolutionary position, and there's another quote from him that I won't read. In 1967, in Chicago, not only would Obasi be founded, but Donnell Lee, Nauhaki Mathubuti, Carolyn Rodgers, and Jahari Amini would found Third World Press. Mathubuti and others would develop the press into today's million-dollar business. Obasi's quest for Black political empowerment met with wondrous and short-lived success in the election of Harold Washington as Chicago's first Black mayor in 1983. I don't want to suggest that Obasi elected him, but Obasi members in Writers for Harold Washington were very active in raising money and getting the word out about his campaign. Baraka's efforts in Newark were rewarded earlier as that city elected its first Black mayor in the 1960s. Hoyt W. Fuller was the reason the Obasi Writers' Workshop endured after other Obasi workshops ceased. Afro-Cobra with Jeff Donaldson evolved out of the Obasi Visual Arts Workshop that had, in 1967, painted the Wall of Respect outdoor mural on the side of a building on 43rd and Langley, sparking the contemporary mural movement across America. Hoyt Fuller, with his background in comparative literature, urbanity, and passionate and incisive intellect and political astuteness, guided us in a search for a Black aesthetic. In 1972, a seminal text edited by critic Addison Gale was published. It was a call to arms by Black critics to overturn the literary establishment's relationship to Black arts and Black artists. Writing in the Black aesthetic, Hoyt Fuller understood the new direction of Black artists. He wrote, "The new literature is characterized by a spirit of rejection of values that have proven useless or destructive or debasing, but there is no protest as protest in it, and the new poetry is a celebration of Blackness and the spirit of Pan-Africanism." Hoyt Fuller had an elegant style that caused him to stand out. He had an eloquence that pulled people to him, and he had a vision that was global. That vision led to him changing the name in 1970, the name of the Johnson Publishing Company journal he edited, Negro Digest, to Black World. Black World was an epicenter of the arts and intellectual thought. Other Black journals existed, but none was as well put together or well distributed as Black World. Black World also had Hoyt W. Fuller as executive editor and Carol A. Parks as managing editor. Black artists, thinkers, and activists congregated in its pages. We met from points around the globe. It was a convergence of energy. It gave us a sense of how significant, how earth-changing our entire movement was, for as critic Larry Neal said, the Black Arts Movement is a sister to the Black Power movement. The Black Consciousness movement shook the world. One of the princes of the Black Arts Movement was South African poet in exile, Kirapetsik Gotsitsili, now poet laureate of South Africa. In the pages of Black World, we read of the indigenous people of Australia who considered themselves Black. Hoyt Fuller and his managing editor, Carol Parks, brought us together. As a result, Black World even printed the Palestinian point of view on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. As a result, Jewish advertisers threatened to withdraw ads from all Johnson publications. Mr. John H. Johnson shut down Black World. I have heard this sad chapter in Black-Jewish relations from Haki Mathubuti, Abner Joan Brown of ETA, and Usini Eugene Perkins, who were all present at a meeting with John H. Johnson as they attempted to have Black World running again. But Black World ended, and so did the central organ of the Black Arts Movement. That was in 1976. There was an attempt to duplicate it independently in First World out of Atlanta, where Hoyt Fuller returned. That attempt lasted from 1977 until 1981, when Hoyt Fuller died suddenly at 58. He who was to the Black Arts Movement what Alain Locke was to the Harlem Renaissance was no longer our voice of reason and clarity. As for me, I had lost my personal guide. I go on to talk about how in 1970 here at Northwestern hosted a wonderful conference of Black visual artists, at least 100, probably even more Black visual artists from all over were present. And one of the talks of the conference was the fact that Elizabeth Catlett was not allowed to attend because the government would not give her a visa to get in the country from Mexico, where she was living, to here. And that underscored for everyone the relationship between the arts and the politics. Because her bent was leftist, surely the cause of this obstruction was Catlett's leftist leanings. Her portraits of workers, women, and children of the poor, as Gwendolyn Brooks would say. There was and is a clear relationship between politics and the arts. Ed Roberson mentioned the fear of the times. This makes me think of the Topographical Center on the South Side. It was a place, a little storefront on 75th Street, where some brothers would give talks about the governmental conspiracy to herd Black people into concentration camps. Then they also said that the projects that had been recently constructed for us, those huge ones that had just recently been torn down so that rich white people could have co-ops there, well, those projects were built to contain Black people in concentrated spaces. There we festered and turned on each other, and that happened. I think of the feeling attendant to these ideas, not so much fear as an awareness, a consciousness that the government itself was marshaled against members of the movement and had been for some time. Just as Elizabeth Catlett had been denied a visa to come into the country for an artist conference, so too had an earlier outspoken hero of the civil rights movement, Paul Robeson, been denied a passport that would allow him to leave the country to pursue his livelihood. And it has been richly documented that J. Edgar Hoover's FBI engaged in surveillance of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. In Chicago, COINTELPRO, an alliance of Chicago Police Department and the FBI, infiltrated activist groups, engaged in wiretapping and surveillance, and engineered the pre-dawn murders of young Black Panthers Fred Hampton and Mark Clark in December 1967. Jeff Donaldson told the story of death threats to Obasi visual artists received as they were in the process of painting the Wall of Respect in 1967. I quote a poem by Nika Giovanni where she talks about how she had been robbed and expressed that she believed it was from people who were trying to stop her revolutionary activities. But she said, the revolution is in the streets, and if I stay on the 5th floor, it will go on. If I never do anything, it will go on. There was a certain paranoia in that time, but I don't know if it's really paranoia if a person is really out to get you. Joyce Carol Thomas, California poet, novelist, and playwright, shared a story of a young revolutionary killed when a bomb in his car went off. We were a generation that lived in the shadow of the assassinations of public figures, from Kennedy's, Medgar Evers, to Malcolm X, to Martin Luther King. We saw, read about, or heard about students gunned down at Jackson State and Kent State. When poor Black people expressed themselves in riots in the language of the unheard, they were quickly subdued. As a rule, the conscious black artists operated without fear, at least from my perspective. Some of them would say otherwise. Did Ishmael Reed sound fearful in I Am a Cowboy in the Boat of Ra when he challenged the white cultural establishment and even ham-fisted black revolutionaries? He was putting white academics, white critics on notice. There was a certain audacity among the poet artists of the black arts movement, even if they were sometimes nervous. They stared the devil down, metaphorically speaking. The poets of the black arts movement understood the relationship between politics and the arts. They saw themselves as creating a functional art, needful to people as food and water and weaponry, serving a purpose that was political. Donnell Lee, Haki Armother-Booty, and Carolyn Rodgers, Obasiites, had made that clear when visiting Professor Hoyt W. Fuller brought them to campus at a reading at Harris Hall in fall 1969. The members of Obasi, the black students, were swept away. The brothers endorsed Carolyn as a soul sister, a bona fide poet. Months later, a senior would stop me in the L. He carried Paper Soul in hand. He opened it to a love poem. "This is poetry," he said, pointing to the poem, putting me in my place in case I had any ideas about being a real poet. The year before, I had had the nerve to argue the significance of race when he claimed our struggle was purely one of class. So he was trying to get back at me. I did not hold this endorsement of Carolyn Rodgers' work against her. I would grow to appreciate her work more and more and more. At that reading, we all recognized the artistry of Carolyn Rodgers. I remember a crowd pleaser, Now Ain't That Love, was. But Haki Donnell Lee was already a superstar. He had been in Ebony, a feature article on him, or soon would be. Of course, maleness was more valued, and all that males spoke was more important, with a few exceptions. Soul was definitely on ice. Haki Donnell Lee wore shades and a vest of many colors. The black girls swooned in the presence of the black poet. The brothers wanted to be him. A host of poets were born that night, I think. My roommate, Jackie, who in another life would be State Senator Jacqueline Y. Collins, carefully, decoratively printed Donnell Lee's poems and taped them to our NU apartment suite's walls. I remember she copied, "Black woman will define herself naturally, will talk, walk, live, and love her images. Her beauty will be. The only way to be is to be. Black man, take her. You don't need music to move. Your movement toward her is music, and she'll do more than dance." Even upper-class women came into our rooms to witness Jackie's wonderful duplication of the gospel according to Donnell Lee. I took a personal interest in Carolyn Rodgers and Donnell Lee. I was falling in love with the poet I would become. I fell in love with my muse and wanted only to follow my spirit sister, spirit self, wherever she took me, at the expense of my expensive education even, or so it would seem. I was interested in only the facts, classes, strategies, and activities that fed my muse and helped me live my life as I saw it. My muse has intelligent memory. I write in layers because my earliest forms of communication were in layers. My muse knows the careful cultural codes black children memorized at play to understand our relationship to America. For example, we taunted, signified on playmates who wore these colors, red, white, and blue. The monkey favors you. In other words, you were a fool if you were so obviously patriotic, or the flag has mistreated us, dehumanized us. A hand game was, "Oh, Mary Mac, 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 all dressed in black, 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 with silver buttons, buttons, buttons all down her back, back, back." She asked her mother, mother, mother for 15 cents to see the elephant, elephant, elephant jump the fence, fence, fence. It jumped so high, 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 it touched the sky, 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 and it never came back, 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 till the 4th of July, lie, lie. Here was subtlety and signifying on the American dream and promise. In other words, the 4th of July is a lie, America is a lie, and possibly the Republican Party symbolized by the elephant is a lie. To the members of the Black Arts Movement, such embedded images and messages were clear and became transparent in the poetry of the time. Senior poet Lucille Clifton puts this relationship to America elegantly and succinctly. Love rejected hurts so much more than love rejecting. They act like they don't love their country. No, what it is they found out their country don't love them. These were the sentiments of the poets of the Black Arts Movement. They could just as easily express the present-day profound sense of outrage and injury of the citizens of Louisiana and Mississippi, victims of the Katrina debacle, as well as the Jena 6. In the mid-1960s in Detroit, Dudley Randall had begun Broadside Press and started publishing the work of Gwendolyn Brooks, Donnell Lee, and a variety of black poets. Broadside Press did an amazing job of presenting voices: Margaret Walker, Lance Jeffers, Marvin X, Etheridge Knight, Nikki Giovanni, Sonia Sanch, Kara Petzico, Cecilia, Stephanie Everett Hoagland, John Raven, Margaret Danner, and others. The press published a series of inexpensive broadsides as well. Even though I published my first poem in Black World in January 1971 and was a semi-regular book reviewer for that journal, I am not often thought of as a poet of the 60s or a Black Arts Movement poet. I entered Obasi, as I said, in October 1969, became an active member in summer 1970, and remained a mainstay until 1990, 2 years before the workshop lost life. Yet more often than not, when Obasi is regarded, only its founding members are considered, I will not complain. This ostensible neglect has given me the chance to forge my own identity in letters, but I will say I believe it is a matter of age. As I recognized early on, I was born in some cases over a decade after early members of the Black Arts Movement. I am considered with the poets of the 70s, and my age mates are some of them: E. Ethelbert Miller, Rita Dove, Patricia Spears Jones, Afa Michael Weaver, possibly Gail Jones, Ntozake Shange, and Tulani Davis, among others. I talk about Rita Dove and a scathing poem she wrote attacking Donnell Lee. In Writers Chronicle, she talked about that poem, and she talked about being prompted to write it because she felt that Black arts poets were pigeonholing her, and she did not want to be pigeonholed. So her poem was like a preemptive strike against what she felt putting on her. Another scathing poem was one that Baraka wrote about Nikki Giovanni, calling her Nikki the Hoe. But yeah, he did. He could, he will talk about people. But I said something about Rita Dove not being a Black arts poet because her style is not in the Black arts tradition. I think, generally speaking, that Black arts poets write with what art critic Bob Thompson says is a frontality that you find in Nigerian art. That is, the words of the poets of the Black Arts Movement leap out at the reader in a direct, in-your-face way. Rita Dove's approach is sideways. But she might be fooling us. She might be like what she says of Billie Holiday: if you can't be free, be a mystery. Okay, I will direct you, if you want to know more about the more thorough critical grasp of the artistic achievements of the poets of the Black Arts Movement, search for Understanding the New Black Poetry by Stephen Henderson. There's also an exciting examination of early Black arts poetry written by Carolyn Rodgers, and Black Poetry, Where It's At in NOMO, A Literary Legacy of Black Chicago, 1967 to 1987. One thing that Henderson stressed is he drew a relationship between Black music and poetic technique, such as worrying the line and rhythm. Black music was the standard of excellence for the Black arts movement. how many of the poets wanted to be singers or saw themselves as singers, as Langston Hughes did when he wrote, "I am the singer and the song." And poets wrote poems about musicians, as Haki Madhubuti did in Don't Cry, Scream, and Michael Harper did in Dear John, Dear Coltrane, and Carolyn Rodgers in Me and Cooley and Karma. Stephen Henderson contends that these young black poets were not so new after all, that they were on a historical continuum. One thing that the characteristic of the black arts poets, particularly the ones with the more nationalistic bent, their modus operandi was telling other people what to do, writing prescriptive art, even didactic, which is in the black nationalist tradition of speakers dating from the 18th century. Perhaps the most famous black arts poets, Baraka, Madhubuti, Giovanni, and Sanchez, functioned most effectively as poet priests who excoriated, preached, lifted themselves to come down to deliver the new law of blackness like Moses. These popular black arts poets were able to tell other people what to do because they were activists, vibrantly involved in their communities. They were talented to gifted poets and writers. Each was charismatic, 3 out of 4 light-skinned. The women were diminutive, the men small or wiry. The article in Ebony described Donnell Lee Haki Madhubuti as Christ-like. They were not big and black and angry. That would have been too scary for white and black societies. The issue of colorism goes without saying. Some people gain popularity more easily, are more quickly accepted because of colorism. When Nikki Giovanni dubbed the Princess of Black Poetry, or that little human stick of dynamite Sonia Sanchez read at Obasi in Separate Summers, the storefront swelled with eager admirers. The crowd spilled out of the 2-room space onto the sidewalk. The people wanted to catch a glimpse of visiting royalty from the East. They wanted to be electrified by 2 electric princesses. Quieter, equally gifted poets like Etheridge Knight and Mary Evans did not attract such massive audiences, and Imamu Amiri Baraka filled Dunbar Auditorium in 1971. He was fire incarnate. In 1969, Nikki released a groundbreaking album, Truth is on Its Way, on which her quick-witted, high-energy poetry was backed by a brilliant gospel choir. At Northwestern, the sound of that album flooded the halls of the black corridor of the NU apartments. We throb with the rhythms and hypnotic message of the last poets. The revolution will not be televised. Ends are scared of revolution. The nation, the black people, the entire black community was seized by poetry mixed with music and on record. Mary Baraka produced Black is Beautiful. Gil Scott-Heron went on record with Pieces of a Man, and Haki Madhubuti and Jane Cortez each did more than 1 album or CD. After Maintain Control, Jane Cortez continued to perform with a band. Queen Mother Gwendolyn Brooks wrote, "We are the last of the loud. Little did she know." I know, I'm wrapping it up. To some extent, poets of the movement have been stereotyped. I am thinking of a ridiculous, albeit hilarious take on the angry black poet, read black arts poet, that wicked genius comedian Richard Pryor did one night on television. He stood before a mic solemnly dressed in black turtleneck and black suit. All of a sudden he began to scream, "Black, black, black, black!" That was the poem. Truth be told, some black poets did write poems that were so excessive, screamed in such rage, that they stereotyped themselves. Okay, and in talking about what's happening now, I say that rap artists have gained a lot from the poets of the black arts movement, and they too are following in a tradition of poetry that is intimately connected to music and poetry that is often political. They also claim their own identities, and that had been done as early on as Langston Hughes in 1926. I stress that the Black arts poets are continuing to write, and they're writing in more than just poetry. They're also writing in writing plays. But there's also something important that must be said, that August Wilson said one night that the progress of a people must not be judged in the number of its PhDs, but in its infant mortality rate. We have not made sufficient progress. Black babies die. The infant mortality rate for white babies is 17.9 deaths versus 5.5 deaths. It's 3 times that of white infants. Life expectancy for blacks is shorter. Now, last year on the Oprah Winfrey Show, there was a brilliant 18-year-old black female student who had revisited the doll preference test that black psychologists had performed on black children in the early 1950s. The results of the test contributed to the passage of Brown versus the Board of Education with all deliberate speed. Each child was given the choice of a white doll or a black one and asked to pick the one that was good or pretty. Invariably, as was the case in the 1950s, the black child chose the white doll. What happened to James Brown, I'm Black and I'm Proud? Or more to the point, Amiri Baraka's backup singers chanting, "Black is beautiful, black is beautiful, 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 black is beautiful." What progress has there been made? What about a black aesthetic? I'm not going to be too critical of the hip-hop generation. Violence is American. The Black arts movement has flourished. Black artists have been active participants in the Black Studies movement, which Ed already spoke to. Black artists have been honored with a surprising number of awards like Pulitzers and Shelley's and Frost. Recently, my mother and I were sitting in the book-lined dining room talking about one of my brilliant nieces and paths she might take if she chose not to become a physician as her own mother had become. She could be a writer, my mother offered excitedly. I almost fell off my chair. But my mother knows there is possibility, a Hoyt W. Fuller word, possibility and strength in the pen. The Black arts movement members know, angels and tricksters alike, we are assaulted by the violence of the world, of violated earth, people, and governments, and we choose to be. For as Hoyt Fuller said one hot summer night at Obasi, you are or you are not.